So Formula One is finally back, and while they're not broadcasting much of the footage, I have got all of the data from the test so far. So while yes, it is just testing, there is a lot to look at, like Toto Wolff's claim that Red Bull can deploy power way better than everyone else in a straight line, and we can also look at some top speeds, see tentatively which cars are stronger where, and also look at a really interesting comparison with what the 2025 cars did at this track, since we can finally put them side by side on a chart. So first of all, here are all the stints complete throughout the test, and it's too early at this stage to predict pace like we usually would in a practice session with this chart, but if you're wondering, this darker orange colour here is Audi, and then the grey colour here is Cadillac. But what we can use this chart for is just to get an idea of who did what, and one thing that does stand out is how little, unfortunately, Aston Martin managed to do. There's only 2 stints here showing up throughout a whole day of testing that Lance Stroll managed to get on the board, of course, with that power unit being Honda. They're the only ones, and it doesn't seem to be working out all too reliably for them at the moment. The other thing we can take from this is actually that the top teams from last year suspiciously already seem to be pretty much up there. If we take sort of the top quarter of the chart, it's already filled with Red Bull, which was of course just Max Verstappen, the Ferraris, the Mercedes. There was rumours of the Mercedes being on higher fuel loads. Of course, we have no idea what the fuel loads or engine modes of all of these drivers are, so it's really not worth reading into too much, but it is interesting that we see the top teams already slightly towards the top. Looking at the actual stint lengths, it's interesting. The vast majority of stints are in this sort of 6 lap and below region. Incredibly messy to look at, but a few did stand out doing longer stints, like the Audi here, Hulkenberg 17 laps, Verstappen here 13 laps. It was impressive actually for the Audi. The Audi managed over 100 laps. Of course, all new manufacturer, new engine. Really good showing so far. And then straight line performance is an interesting one too. So at the moment, it's actually Ocon in the Haas at the top. Of course, that's a Ferrari powered car, followed then by Norris. And then we see quite a lot of Verstappen at the top. And of course, again, we can't take too much, but it is interesting to see just how much the teams are experimenting. So McLaren, for example, is shown all the way down here with a speed trap performance of 297 kilometers an hour. But on another run, then they were at 324, which is a massive sort of 30 kilometer an hour difference almost. Shows they're experimenting a lot, whereas Audi sat here very reservedly. All of their top speeds very similar. It's like they were running a very consistent plan, which I guess makes sense for them as a new team. And then Ferrari generally sort of towards the upper end. Williams absolutely towards the lower end for the vast majority. Of course, they're behind on running. Something else interesting we can look at are the fastest laps of each team plotted on the track dominance chart. And while we can't take any sweeping conclusions from this, we can see what Toto Wolff was on about, with Red Bull seemingly deploying the best on the straights. And we see here, of course, in blue, this is where Red Bull's quickest, here towards the end of the main straight, also largely on this second straight, but also the light grey. This is actually Racing Bulls, so also that same Red Bull Ford power unit. And if you combine the light grey with the blue, that's pretty much dominating all the straights. So it's interesting, perhaps they're just dumping more power on the straights compared to other teams. Perhaps it's something inherent in the power unit that makes them better at doing that. We shall see. The other trend that you can generally take from this is that McLaren very quick in the acceleration zones, out of the corners, so perhaps that's where they're choosing to use all their electrical power at the moment, but it remains to be seen whose power unit is really on top at this stage. So finally then, for a quick bit of telemetry before we compare to the 2025 cars, this is Verstappen versus Norris's quickest laps. While we can't take any big conclusions, we can see some interesting trends that just wouldn't have happened last year, and the main one that stands out to me is this. So into turn 1, we've got Verstappen nearly 15 kilometers an hour quicker than Norris, and last year that would have indicated that Verstappen had a massively low downforce setup, that he was going to be quicker in a straight line everywhere. But then all of a sudden you look over here and turn 14 towards the end of the lap, perhaps Verstappen's battery is running low at that point, and Norris now is over 15 kilometers an hour quicker into turn 14. And it will be interesting to see how this starts to play out in races this year, because if one driver gets caught out with a battery that's depleted, or perhaps just gets sort of outdone on tactics, they could end up 15, 20, maybe even 30 kilometers an hour slower down a straight than the car that's trying to overtake them. So how do these cars compare to the 2025 machines? Well, here you go. This yellow dotted line is Piastri's fastest race lap from the Bahrain Grand Prix last year, and it's actually a really similar lap time to what here. So we've got Leclerc now and Verstappen's lap still These laps are actually pretty similar. They're within sort of a handful of tenths. So we can see the general characteristics of similar lap times, although of course one was a race lap time, likely on much older tyres than what these guys have done, but it's still interesting to see. One thing that stands out for starters, again, is right at the start of the lap here, the huge top speed difference. You thought that top speed difference between Norris and Verstappen was a lot. Well, it's more like 30 or 40 kilometres an hour faster than last year's cars. The other thing we can see is that sort of Leclerc is already beating that sort of slow speed performance in most cases, so that seems to be showing that these cars are a bit more nimble, a bit better in the corners, the slow speed corners anyway, because actually the high speed corners is where we see a big difference. So here in turns sort of 11 and 12 region, we see the yellow dotted line sat significantly above what these guys were doing and testing. Again, it's about 20 kilometers an hour, and those corners are, if we look at the map, they're over here. They're these high-speed sections, sort of 11 into 12 here. So that makes sense. We've lost so much downforce on these cars. Of course, it's going to show up in the data, and it absolutely does. The other thing we start to see as well is the different shapes in the high-speed sort of acceleration zones. So on the yellow dotted line, we see sort of it creeps up and then very quickly drops away as the brakes are slammed on, whereas already we're seeing demonstrated appropriately by the Ferrari car a lot of lift and coast going on. So you see almost in all of these peaks of speed, the red line sort of slowly drops away first before the brakes are put on, and that's the lift and coast going on already, basically just to charge the battery, because the performance return you get from a bit of extra lift and coast is now a lot more significant than last year, when it felt like we were already hearing a lot about lift and coast. So yeah, it's going to be even more this time. And I was actually surprised that that fastest racing lap from last year was pretty similar to what we saw today. But if we put in the pole laps, this is now Piastri's pole lap in the dotted white, this is more like 5 or 6 seconds quicker than what the 2026 cars have done. And I'm sure the 26 cars will go a lot quicker, but they're not going to get 6 seconds quicker. And again, here we just see all the same trends that we saw before, massively amplified. So here now in the high speed section, sort of 30 to 40 kilometers an hour quicker that last year's cars were able to go. And again, we see very sharp braking zones. Very little, in fact, pretty much no lift and coast went on in qualifying sessions last year. I do wonder if that's going to be the case this year or not. That will be interesting to see. So that's all the data I have for you. I really hope it's at least somewhat made up for the lack of television coverage that they've allowed us. If you're interested in joining the discussion, then the Discord link is in the description, as always, and so is the new Instagram link. But that's all, so thank you for watching, and I'll see you very soon.